With us today, Jeff Cagna, Executive Advisor at Foresight First. Kick us off, Jeff, by telling us a little bit about how you found associations, what's kept you here. You've been in our industry for a couple of years now, and tell us a little bit about your history and journey here.
Well, I will. I'll spare your viewers and your listeners the long and gory details. I'll just give you the highlights. If you want to know,
lowlights are good too, but we can start with highlights. Yeah.
If you want to know more about the all the details, you can see my LinkedIn profile, jeffonlinkedin.com.
There we go.
So I've been in associations now for it's probably in my 33rd year in associations at this point. I've been 23 years as a consultant, advisor, speaker for associations, and the first 15 of those were under the banner of Principal Innovation, going back to 2002 right up until 2017, and then since 2017, it's been Foresight First has been my banner. And it's been an exciting process. I didn't set out to work in associations, and that's not an unusual thing for people to say. Most people that I know and that I've grown up with in associations did not set out to work in associations.
No.
But my first association job was with Business and Professional Women USA back in 1992. And working on Mass Ave. All my association jobs were right around DuPont Circle. That was I was meetings assistant. I became meetings coordinator, went on to another association, and then went on to, that was the American Corporate Counsel Association. And then I went on to the Greater Washington Society of Association Executives and worked there, went to grad school, came back, worked at GWSA again, and finished my association staff career at the end of 2001 with the Special Libraries Association. And then I started the business in 2002, and here I am now, in the 23rd year of this, and it's been a great process of working with a lot of associations around the United States, around North America, and in other parts of the world as well.
Yeah, the diversity there, the background, just being able to not just work with one association, being able to have the experience of working with several different capacities, I've just found that makes for stellar consultants, right? You understand the seats, the challenges, the opportunities. And so what was the impetus for Foresight First? And maybe that wasn't the original name, but for launching out onto your own, and then tell us a little bit about current day. Bring us forward.
Yes, so I think, I'll say briefly that the original rationale for Principal Innovation back in the day was just exactly what you said, feeling like as a consultant, as an advisor, I could do more for more associations if I were working on my own with a variety of organizations rather than working for one association at a time. And I wanted to focus on innovation because that was something that was of great interest to me. And but I wanted to do it in a way that was consistent with how I felt that I had conducted myself in my association career. So hence the name Principled Innovation. And after 15 years of doing that work, spending a lot of time working on innovation, business model innovation, and helping associations kind of think through how to make innovation a discipline, a set of practices they follow rather than just, kind of a enhanced creativity, right? I sort of became a little less interested in the innovation conversation. It kind of became less significant to me. I had less energy for it. And where I saw the opportunity emerging, and I really thought about this for a couple of years, it was a process of my own transition that basically started in 2015 and took me 2 years to get from there to the kind of rebrand and refocus of Foresight First in 2017 was through the work of innovation. I was seeing that boards were not functioning in the way that I thought they could, and that they needed to work at a higher level and need to elevate their performance. And so in 2014, I wrote an article for Associations Now in which I coined the term the duty of foresight, which was the idea that boards had a responsibility, a duty to learn as much as possible with the future. And that really in some ways set me off on this course of thinking, okay, how do I make a transition, or should there be a transition? And ultimately that transition, as I said, occurred in 2017. And that's been really the centerpiece of what I've been doing, is try to shift the focus of boards away from some of the traditional activities in which they have historically consumed their time and attention, and focus more on the essential outcomes of the work that they're there to perform, and to use the duty of foresight as a way of organizing their thinking about how they could perform at a higher level. And I've been sort of developing this methodology that I call stewardship, governing, and foresight over the course of these last many years. And so that's where I am now, is really trying to keep my focus on helping boards. My phrase that I like to use is association boards must become more than they have been historically, more than they are today, more than they imagine that they can be. And so, and all of that is centered around the duty of foresight as a way of thinking about their role. And so, so that's been the process that I followed over the course of these last 22 years. February 1st was 22 years. So now in the 23rd year, and this will continue at least for the foreseeable future.
I really like that, just in general, the idea that the board should be the ones thinking down the road, right? The staff is sort of working, I'll say, in the business, right? And the board should be really working on the business, on the vision. And so, taking some pretty broad strokes, what are some of those things that you observe that were the traditional methodologies or traditional means of thinking that boards, and I got it's some generalizations, but I just want to put out some terms or coin some things here, put them on the table that may give some folks some ideas of, hey, if you're thinking about this, there might be another way.
One of the things that has been true. I mean, let's take a step back. The whole idea of boards, dates back to the Middle Ages, right? So we've got 500 years of baggage, you could say, around what boards, have done historically. Now it's fast forward to a more recent time where, the words that are mostly synonymous with what boards do include words like oversight, policy, committees, fiduciary responsibility. And all of those things are extremely important, right? I've been a director, I've been an officer of boards. And so I'm not saying that any of those things is unimportant. But again, those represent the traditional activities of what boards do. It is important for boards to make policies. It's important for committees to operate well. It's important for the duties of care, loyalty, and obedience to be observed by boards. That's all extremely important, and I don't question that at all. Sure. But that's the smallest part, really, of what boards should be doing, right? As you're suggesting, like, we need our boards to be learning with the future, to be actually in the current configuration, the current definition, what I refer to as the next definition, because it's next after the original definition of the duty of foresight, is that, it's about standing up for their successors' futures, right? How can they, through their intentional learning, through the willingness to make sacrifices in the short term, through taking long-term action, how can they stand up for the futures of the successors that they will never know personally, not just the people who will join them on their boards in the coming years or who will join the association in the coming years? How will they stand up for the futures of people they will never know personally as we move into the second half of this decade, into the 2030s and beyond? So it's a much bigger set of responsibilities than I think we can even possibly, imagine, or would have imagined even 25 or more years ago. And so we need to help our boards get to a place where they can, operate at that level, because that's what's required, right? If this wasn't required, then we could have a different conversation. But everything we've learned, right, in these last 4+ years since the start of what I refer to as the turbulent 20s, we're now more than 1,500 days in. Everything we've seen, everything we've experienced, everything we've lost, right? There's been a tremendous amount of pain and suffering and difficulty in these last 4+ years. So we're looking toward the rest of this decade. We're looking toward the 2030s. There's a lot of stuff coming at us. We need our boards to be at that place. And these other activities are extremely important, and we have to find ways to make sure they are handled and done so responsibly. But we also have to redirect our board's attention toward the future so that they are thinking about and having the right conversations and making good decisions. because what happens in 2024 will affect what happens in 25 and 26 and 27 and into these outer years. And we've got to set the right direction, the right tone, the right perspective on how that moves forward. And that's why the focus for me on the duty of foresight is so crucial, because it's the way that our organizations and our boards and our associations are able to establish the right perspective, the right way of thinking about things, and take the right approach in terms of both the way they talk about the issues they're facing and the decisions that they make to guide the organizations into the future.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. One of the things that, as you're talking, I'm thinking about just sort of winding the clock back or zooming out, where you'd like, before that time, 1,501 days ago, if you look at even strategic plans, which I want to differentiate from a strategic plan in a minute, I'm going to have you do that. Those were for associations 5-year strategic plans. In some cases, they had a 10-year strategic plan. But what I observed over the last few years is there's been a contraction of that, right? There's been this method that, hey, actually, maybe we need to do a 1 or 2 year strategic plan because I think I need to be prepared for, another pandemic, right? Which isn't wrong, but that can shrink the thinking a little bit to very short-term tactical type items, which I've seen a lot more do. And now it's the perfect time, to your point, as an inflection to bring it back out and go longer term. So typically in these, and so I'll ask you to differentiate from a traditional association strategic plan, sort of a foresight modeling. And then how far out are you looking in that sort of model? Because I believe you should be looking out maybe even a couple of decades. And I appreciate the notion of looking at setting up your future for success, one that you might not be a part of, and then making a transitional plan between now and that point.
Yeah. So if people go to my LinkedIn profile, they will see at the top there that I use several descriptors for myself, and one of them is association contrarian, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm a contrarian on a lot of things, and that would include strategic planning. So I would say that I think that associations should not be engaged in the work of strategy as an exercise in planning. They should be using instead the approach of strategy as a process of learning, like what's critical in 2024 under conditions that I have been talking a lot about lately. This comes from a model developed by a futurist named Jame Cascio, which is, we're operating in an environment of increased brittleness, increased anxiety, increased nonlinearity, and increased incomprehensibility. The acronym for that is BANI. And that does not in any way discount the fact that there is tremendous volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. It's another model, VUCA, that's been popular for the last 30 or so years. BANI is a more recent development from Cascio, from Jame Cascio, from just pre-pandemic 2018, but it really reflects where we are. So if you think about those conditions that we've been facing for a long time, and more intensity in them in the more recent period of the first 4+ years of the 2020s, we really need a process around strategy that is about learning more so than it is about the planning process, right? Because planning depends on predictability, it depends on stability, and that's not really where we find ourselves now. We need to be adaptive more so than anything else, anticipatory and adaptive. So if you take a 120-month time frame, right, which is typically where this conversation starts, look at the next 120 months. The way that I like to encourage associations to break it down is say, okay, you have a 36-month strategy window. And within your 36-month strategy window, you're probably going to be thinking more in terms of 6, 12, 18 months or more, but in more blocks of time that are shorter than the total 36-month window, rather than trying to put together a strategy for an entire 36 months, because you need to adapt that strategy based on what you learn, collaborating with your stakeholders, collaborating with your partners, understanding the environment, doing the learning that you need to do about what's happening in the world around you. Those 84 months beyond the strategy window, I refer to as the foresight horizon. And the foresight horizon is where I'm trying to challenge boards to put almost all of their attention, right? If the staff can work with a variety of other contributors, I believe, for example, that one of the best ways for associations to involve their young contributors. Every association wants to figure out a way to attract people under the age of 30, people, the youngest stakeholders in their organizations, in their fields. I say, let's give them one of the most important responsibilities we can give them, which is to help shape the strategic direction of organizations that ideally would like to serve them for the next 40 years, right? So let's get them involved in that conversation as quickly as possible and have them be the ones to really take the primary stewardship responsibility for the strategy conversation, while our boards are focusing their attention in this foresight horizon. There's 84 months, which is 7 years. And that's really the extent to which most people feel comfortable imagining a future, 5, 7, maybe 10 years at most, right? Most people do not see themselves being able to contemplate a 15 or 20 or more year future. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't use those inputs. There are plenty of futurists out there. I'm friends with many of them. And they can provide lots of really meaningful longer-term input to conversations that can stay within that 84-month time horizon for boards, because the idea is not to turn boards into futurists. The idea is to make boards better decision makers. So if we can frame up their attention around that 84-month time horizon, and let's really understand what those futures could look like. What could the future look like in 2029, 2030, 2031? Let's imagine those futures. Let's ask those questions. What's a plausible future that could be good for us? What's a plausible future that could be not so good for us? What's a plausible future that could be really bad for us, right? Get the resilience of the conversations of contemplating multiple futures. Then that's a great way for us to use our board's attention and energy and talent. And then what happens is, with staff partners being very heavily involved in this and other contributors as well, is everyone talks to each other, right? Like in a world of technology, we have to go to something very fundamental, which is everyone talks to each other. The strategy team or council for an association composed primarily of younger people, talking with staff, talking with the board, talking with everyone listens and talks to each other, right? To figure out, what are we learning over here? What are we learning over here? How do we bring that together, right? We establish channels of communication so that everyone can be in the right space around things. And what's more strategic in the short term is influenced by what we see in the long term. And the strategy can also be enhanced by that long-term view. So we're having to, I think, reimagine the way that this conversation happens in our organizations. And I think we can use technologies to support it. But ultimately, this is a human conversation that we need to have involving a wide variety of a great diversity of voices across our organization. So that's the way that I look at it. And I think, it's appropriate to the environment in which we find ourselves to have a different approach than the one that has been, historically used in the association community.
If those that are listening take nothing else from this conversation, it's to have conversations. I like that. We're going to highlight that somehow. The other thing I heard you say, Jeff, which is very contrarian, is you want to pull up those younger members who are in their 20s, and you're not giving them, putting their hands on the wheel of the ship, so to speak, but you're asking them to point towards a horizon that they'd like to steer towards. Is that fair?
Well, ultimately the boards is going to be the group that makes decisions on behalf of the organization. That doesn't change. But, the thing that I would say is that, when I've talked about this in the past, in some situations, I've had older directors on boards say, what qualifies someone who's in their 20s to, have a voice in this kind of conversation? And my response is, what qualifies someone in their 50s or 60s to know what people in their 20s need, right? And so I think we have something going on both sides here. We can turn this into a debate. I'm not saying you, but I'm saying in our community, we could make this a debate about whether people in their 50s and 60s are better equipped to make these choices or whether younger people are. I say, let's set that debate aside and have a different conversation, which is, how can we work together to make this a better organization, right? So the people in their 20s and 30s are the ones who are, as I said earlier, are going to be part of the organization for 30, 40, 50 years. And so let's listen to what they have to say now and help them, give them a major voice in shaping their own future on behalf of the organization. And let's still have our more experienced, our more seasoned members who are serving on the board have their voices also be a part of this, ultimately make the decisions. But when we view this as more of a collaboration, right, and more of a way where everyone can contribute to the process, we have a much better chance of coming up with a better result. And so I think that, it's understanding everyone's role. It's understanding the benefit that everyone brings to the table, and to design it in a way where there is mutual benefit for everyone who contributes, and that we get at something that I would more accurately describe as a positive sum outcome. We're very used to using the language zero sum outcome, where someone has to win and someone has to lose. I say, let's look at this as a positive sum outcome, where actually the outcome is greater than the sum of the parts, right? So I think that's the way to imagine this and say, okay, yeah, this is something we're doing together. More input, more voices, more participation, more contribution to the work, more shared stewardship of the organization, the better off that we will be. That changes the way the board thinks about its role. It changes the way the younger contributors think about their role, changes the way the staff thinks about its role. And everyone now gets into a place of saying, hey, you know what? We're working together to leave the association better than how we found it. And that's, for me, the message that we want to be talking about in our organizations. And I think this is a way of achieving that.
Yeah. In your mind, Jeff, whose responsibility is this, right? The board is a group. The CEO is an individual. Is it a combination? If I'm in which seat, should I say, and I think the answer is probably on some level, everybody should be thinking about this within the organization. But ultimately, whose responsibility is this?
Well, I think in most associations, it's going to start with the CEO, but I don't think it can be put upon the CEO entirely. Like, I think we put a lot of burden on our CEOs to carry a lot of responsibility for the organization. And I don't think it's entirely inappropriate that we do that, but I'm also very concerned about the impact of that burden on our CEOs. Is it too much, right? Is it going to cause them to burn out? This has been a very intense period of time these last few years. And again, I don't see that going away. I've been saying in some of my public sessions, I wish we could just all call time out and take a 3-month break, after everything we've been through, to sort of take a breather, but we can't. Like, it's just not possible.
The post-pandemic sabbatical.
Yeah. I mean, it would be ideal if that were available to us, but it's not, right? So I'm very concerned about what's happening with our CEOs. I'm very concerned about what's happening with our boards. We're seeing a lot of that issue around the same issues around exhaustion and burnout. We've got to find better ways of managing this, which is frankly part of the reason why I feel even more strongly about what I've been describing to you here, because we need to share this burden across our organization. So yeah, I think the conversation, you're right, has to have a start somewhere. As I said, it probably starts with the CEO, but pretty quickly we've got to get board chairs, presiding officers, the term that I use to cover all titles, president, chair, whatever. And I think we have to get them all involved in this conversation very quickly to say, how can we bring in, to me, the inclusion of our younger stakeholders in these conversations is simply nothing but win for everyone. Everyone benefits from it. They benefit from it. Our boards benefit from it. Our staff benefits from it. Everyone benefits from them having a much more vocal, much more present, much more substantive role in the way we shape their futures. And that's the key thing I keep coming back to. The futures that boards are talking about today do not belong to them. They belong to young people that we're talking about here, right? And as a guy in his mid-50s, I'm keenly aware of the fact that I feel in many ways that people who are my age, people who look like me, haven't done everything we can to leave it better than how we found it for those who are going to follow us in these next 20, 30, 40 years. So I feel like while there's still an opportunity for us to do something, let's be very serious about how we involve these voices in our conversations and take it, to another level where their talents, their energy, their prescience, their foresight, can add value to these conversations and in ways that, frankly, I think we will be amazed. And I think we have to find the opportunities to do that and reconfigure these processes, which have historically been very insular, right? Very closed, very limited in who gets to participate. We need to open this up and be much more inclusive and have much greater diversity. I think we can accomplish a heck of a lot more if we do that. And I think the conditions in which we find ourselves in this banny environment, as I was talking about before, really demand that we have a different approach to this kind of work. And I think that we will see tremendous benefit if we do it this way.
Yeah, I think for a second, if I put myself in the seat of somebody here in the audience who's listening as an association exec, and my gears start to churn, and the questions I'm asking myself as I listen to us is, where would I fall? Am I exceeding this Foresight benchmark? But let me switch gears on you just for a second, Jeff. I want to talk about your AIMP credentials there. Tell us a little bit more about that. Quickly, I want to learn and just share. You got some passion, history with AI. Tell us more.
I've been studying AI for quite a number of years because it is obvious. I mean, even before we ever heard the words COVID-19 or global pandemic, we knew that the turbulence of this decade would be present because of issues like artificial intelligence, because AI has been having a moment. Well, AI, obviously goes back to the 1950s as an academic discipline, and even before that, we were sort of fascinated with the idea of robots and that sort of thing, from fiction and so on. But really, for these last 10 or so years, 10, maybe 12 years since about 2012, AI has been having this renewed moment of interest on a global basis. And of course, that's been accentuated by what's happened in the last 18 months or so since generative AI has become the thing for organizations. So I've been studying this for quite a long time, and this intensification of the impact of AI that has emerged in the course of these last 18 months or so has put this issue squarely on the board agenda, because generative AI, unlike what some people will say that it's just a set of tools, I actually think of it as a truly disruptive force that is affecting our organizations, it's affecting our society, and it's affecting each one of us individually. One of the sessions that I present, that I'll actually be presenting, within the next month or so, is that the title is why we're all AI ethicists now. We all have to have a voice in this conversation around what happens with AI. So one of the things I wanted to do was really continue to deepen my understanding as someone who is committed to the importance of intentional learning of AI, really to go deeper than I've done in my own work. And I came across this opportunity with the Institute of Artificial Intelligence Management and to do this AIMP learning offering, which is completely online. And it's a series of text-based modules that you read, and then there are quizzes and a final exam and that sort of thing. And I found it very valuable because even though the post-nominal that I had would not necessarily suggest it, it was very focused on AI ethics. In fact, the substance of it was almost completely oriented toward issues around AI ethics, around AI as a human rights issue, AI, sort of ethical questions for government, ethical questions for organizations, for companies, and for individuals, multiple modules covering these issues. And I think was a really valuable experience for me. I've done some other credentials as well with other entities, including an AI ethics course with the London School of Economics, because to me, the issues that we're facing around this have to be grounded in the idea that our adoption of AI has got to be ethical, purposeful, and responsible. And that is, for me, part of the reason why this is such an important board question. Boards and CEOs must work together. They must collaborate very closely, of course, with other contributors as well. But the board and the CEO must be really together on this. And I think, if for no other reason, we've seen what's happened with OpenAI and the issues with that company, with the board and the CEO, and the challenges there back in the fall, and then how that's unfolded over the course of these last many months. We want to make sure in our community that our boards and our CEOs are together on the issues around AI, because it could be a hugely disruptive problem if they are not. And so this is an opportunity now for our associations to be having this conversation at the board level as well as the staff level around what constitutes ethical adoption, what constitutes purposeful adoption, what constitutes responsible adoption. For me, each one of those areas covers different things, which is why I think we need all three of them. Some of those terms are used in the AI space in different ways, but I think we have to have a unified perspective on what is required of us as institutions in a low trust society. I think that's an understatement, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have to be the institutions, in my view, that are the ones that really demonstrate seriousness of purpose in the way we're addressing the AI issue. And because there is so many challenges in how it's playing out in the relationship between the companies that are developing AI, the government, and other third parties, other sectors that are using AI, the international community, the way AI is being regulated in Europe and elsewhere. We in the United States, our associations really have to play, in my view, a leading role in shaping this conversation on behalf of stakeholders and our successors, with this idea that it's got to be ethical, purposeful, and responsible in our approach. So I think this is a really critical moment for our organizations to demonstrate that we can be long-term and high influence players in this very important conversation.
Well, I either struck an area of passion or a nerve or both. And if you haven't gone to just LinkedIn, as we suggested, you probably will after this episode. You'll see a long list of credentialing. Jeff is a lifelong learner, as I've learned, full of curiosity, full of wisdom, which is what makes great leaders. So we could make a whole nother episode, Jeff, just about AI, and maybe we should, because I'd love to chat and pull your ear on that a bit more.
Love to do that. That'd be fun.
I have the unfortunate exercise here of wrapping us up, but I would love to ask you, Jeff, who from your network do you think our audience would benefit from hearing from further?
Well, I'm glad that we're tying it in here at the end to the conversation around AI, because the person who I think would really add a lot of value to the discussion on your show, Lucas, is Demita Snow, who works for the American Society of Civil Engineers, a neighbor of mine in Reston. And Demita has done a lot of very important work with ASCE, with the Society for Scholarly Publishing, and in other areas of the association community on AI, looking at it through a diversity, equity, and inclusion lens. She was recently honored by the Association Women in Technology group, AWTC, for her work as a technology champion in the association community. And I think that she would add a lot of insight and perspective for your listeners and viewers on the importance of looking at AI through the DEI lens and its impact on the most vulnerable populations in our country, but also around the world. And so I think that as well as in other aspects of the conversation. So I think Demita would be an excellent person to have on your show. So I hope that can happen.
Wonderful. Well, as a Falls Church native, I consider folks in Reston neighbors as well, you as well. So look forward to having her on the show. And thanks again, Jeff, for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Lucas. I appreciate it. It was a great conversation.